In 2009, a country known around the world for its neutrality, its discretion, its quiet diplomacy, did something no political analyst saw coming. It put 7 words into its constitution. The construction of minarets is prohibited. A minaret is that tall, thin tower next to a mosque, traditionally used to make the call to prayer. This wasn't decided behind closed doors by some parliament. It was the Swiss people, voting directly under a system of direct democracy that has existed in the country for centuries. In Switzerland, all it takes is 100,000 signatures to force any issue straight to a national popular vote, a mechanism the Swiss themselves use often to decide everything from pension reform to foreign policy. And the result of this particular vote wasn't close at all. Here's the detail nobody expected. At the time of the vote, there were 180 mosques in all of Switzerland. Only 4 of them had a minaret. And not one of those 4 towers was actually used to make the call to prayer. The object the entire country voted to ban barely existed in practice. So why did 57.5% of the Swiss vote to ban something that was practically not even there? To understand that, you have to go back to a country that looked like the exact opposite of what it was about to become. For decades, Switzerland sold the world an image of near absolute neutrality. It stayed out of both world wars. It's not part of the European Union. It's home to international organizations, a vault for the world's fortunes, a land of quiet diplomatic deals. And at the same time, it always had a proportionally enormous foreign population. Around 20% of everyone living in the country was born abroad, one of the highest rates in Europe. Within that foreign population, roughly 400,000 people practiced Islam in a country of just over 7 million people at the time. And for years, that coexisted without much public tension. The issue actually started with something small. Muslim residents of the town of Langenthal in the canton of Bern wanted to build a mosque with a minaret. On its own, the request probably would have been settled at the local level, like any other building permit. But it was this specific, almost administrative request that a conservative political party, the Swiss People's Party, already the country's largest political force in elections around that time, turned into a national vote, using exactly the 100,000 signature mechanism that Swiss direct democracy allows. Hold on to that detail because it explains everything that follows. The debate quickly stopped being about mosque towers and turned into something else entirely. The Swiss government opposed the ban. The major parties, both left and center-right, urged a no vote. Christian churches, Jewish communities, and the country's own Muslim leadership formed a joint chorus against the measure. The Swiss Council of Religions, which brings together all these traditions, came out against it. And even so, when the votes were counted, 22 of Switzerland's 26 cantons approved the ban. Only 4 rejected it: Basel City and the French-speaking cantons of Geneva, Vaud, and Neuchâtel. A Swiss political scientist, interviewed at the time, described what was really at stake. The debate had moved away from the concrete, the towers themselves, and turned into a symbol of a bigger question. How should Switzerland integrate its Muslim population? And what should it do about the fear of extremism growing among part of the public? But that wasn't the last time Switzerland surprised the entire continent. 12 years later, in 2021, the country went back to the polls, this time to decide on something completely different: whether covering your face in public should become a crime. On paper, the proposal never mentioned religion or Islam directly. It only spoke of banning clothing that covered the entire face, with exceptions for health, security, or local traditions like carnival. But everyone involved in the campaign knew exactly what was being voted on. The BAN, in practice, targeted the burqa and the niqab, 2 types of veil that cover the whole face, worn by a small fraction of Muslim women. The burqa covers the entire body, head to toe, with a mesh screen at eye level. The niqab is similar, but leaves the eyes completely visible, covering only the rest of the face. And here's the number that should make you stop and think. According to a University of Lucerne study cited by international news agencies, practically nobody in Switzerland wears a burqa. Only about 30 women in the entire country wore the niqab at the time of the vote. Muslims make up about 5% of the entire Swiss population. 30 women in a country of more than 8 million people. For comparison, that's fewer people than fit in a single crowded rush hour train car in Zurich. And even so, the result came out narrow but in favor. 51.2% for the ban against 48.8% opposed. Again, the Swiss government opposed it, calling the phenomenon marginal and warning about the possible impact on tourism, and Switzerland receives a significant number of visitors from wealthy Arab countries every year. And again, the measure passed anyway. The head of the committee that organized the 2021 vote was the same politician who had led the Minaret campaign 12 years earlier. The same name, the same grassroots mobilization strategy, the same party now winning for a second consecutive time on a similar issue. And the line he repeated to the press sums up the entire argument behind both votes. In Switzerland, tradition is to show your face. That's a sign of the country's basic freedoms. Switzerland actually arrived late to this European race. France had been the first to take this step more than 10 years earlier in April 2011, the first country in Europe to ban full face covering in public, approved in the Senate by a near unanimous vote of 246-1. In the first 5 months after the French law took effect, police recorded around 100 cases of women stopped for wearing a veil, and fewer than 10 of those cases actually turned into formal court proceedings. That reveals a pattern that would later repeat in Switzerland. The law exists, it's rarely enforced, but the political debate around it is enormous. And that debate crossed borders. The United Nations publicly condemned both the French vote and, years later, the Swiss one, calling this type of ban discriminatory. A UN Human Rights Committee formally declared in a 2019 ruling involving a similar case in Denmark that this kind of law violates international human rights obligations. European governments in general simply ignored these criticisms and kept enforcing the laws anyway. And this is exactly where the story turns into a genuine debate with no easy answer, one worth presenting from both sides with equal weight. On one side, supporters of both measures argue that they are not about persecuting a religion, but about defending a principle. In a direct democracy, the people have the right to decide through the vote what kind of society they want to build, even if the decision looks symbolic, and even if it affects a small number of people. Some supporters of the veil law go further, arguing it protects women who might be forced by family members to cover themselves against their own will. An argument similar to the one the French government used in 2011, saying the law promoted gender equality, not religious persecution. For this side, the size of the problem matters less than the principle being defended. On the other side, critics, including the Central Council of Muslims in Switzerland and international human rights organizations, argue that laws targeting such a small number of people reveal that the real target was never the object itself, but the Muslim community as a symbol. The council itself called the law a symbol of exclusion, and even organized a fund to help women who chose to keep wearing the veil pay their fines. For this side, passing a law against something that barely exists in practice is, in fact, a way of sending a message of exclusion to an entire minority, not solving a real problem of coexistence. And there is a technical argument worth mentioning too. If the law truly aims to protect women forced to wear a veil against their will, fining the woman herself, instead of whoever might be forcing her, could end up punishing exactly the person the law claims to want to protect. After the 2021 referendum, Switzerland joined a list that already included France, Austria, Bulgaria, Belgium, and Denmark, countries that, each in their own way, had approved some kind of restriction on covering the face in public. The pattern spread across Europe well before Switzerland, but the Swiss case drew attention precisely because it was decided directly by the people, vote by vote, rather than by a parliament or a government. It took nearly 4 years for the law to move off paper. Only on January 1st, 2025 did the ban actually take effect nationwide, after the government turned the referendum result into federal law. The fine originally proposed went as high as 10,000 Swiss francs, the equivalent of more than $11,000. But after public consultations, the government considered the amount disproportionate and reduced it to up to 1,000 francs, with an option to pay 100 francs on the spot. The first fine issued under the new law happened in Zurich, just days after it took effect. A woman wearing a burqa in public refused to pay the fine on the spot, and the case was sent to the cantonal governor's office for formal processing. The law also covers things that, at first glance, have nothing to do with religion. Balaclavas worn by protesters or masks worn by rowdy stadium fans. But there are specific exceptions. You are allowed to cover your face on a plane, in a diplomatic building, at a place of worship, or for reasons of health, security, weather, or local tradition, like carnival. And this is the question that remains for the end. When a democracy decides through direct vote and simple majority to restrict the practice of a religious minority, even if that practice affects a small number of people, is that democracy working exactly as it should? Or is it proof that even democratic systems can, with legitimate popular support, vote against the rights of whoever is in the minority? It is worth remembering that this dilemma is not unique to Switzerland. It repeats with variations in every country on the list already mentioned: France, Belgium, Austria, Bulgaria, Denmark, and it keeps spreading. Portugal recently debated a similar proposal, and other European parliaments have the issue on the table. The Swiss difference is just the method. Instead of a parliament deciding from above, it was the people themselves, vote by vote, who chose this direction, which makes the question even harder to answer, because it removes the easy excuse of it was a politician's decision, not the people's. What do you think? Let us know in the comments. And subscribe to Veridian, because this is exactly the kind of story we exist to tell.